The highest education in America. First, 100 public and private colleges, 100% Christian mission statements. In 1636, the colonists began at Cambridge, Massachusetts, the first college on the American continent. Its commencement was as follows, quote, "The magistrates led the way by a subscription among themselves of 200 pounds in books for the library. The comparatively wealthy followed with gifts of 20 and 30 pounds. The needy multitude succeeded, like the widow of old, casting their mites into the treasury. A number of sheep was bequeathed by one man, a quantity of cotton cloth worth 9 shillings, presented by another, a pewter flagon worth 10 shillings, by a third, a fruit dish, a sugar spoon, a silver-tipped jug, one great set and one smaller trencher set. By others, the ends, says Cotton Mather, for which our fathers chiefly erected a college, were that scholars might there be educated for the service of Christ and his churches, in the work of the ministry, and that the youth might be seasoned in their tender years with such principles as brought their blessed progenitors into this wilderness. There is no one thing of greater concernment to these churches in present and after times than the prosperity of that society. We cannot subsist without a college," end quote. Harvard College, founded a college accordingly, was established in 1636. And in 1638, Reverend John Harvard, a learned and wealthy minister, died, and by his will gave 1/2 of his property and his entire library to the college at Boston. And hence it is called Harvard College, and now also Cambridge University. Christian facts connected with its establishment, according to the rules for the government of this college, the president or professor, on being inaugurated, must first, quote, "repeat his oath to the civil government. Then he must declare his belief in the scriptures of the Old and New Testaments, and promise to open and explain the scriptures to his pupils with integrity and faithfulness, according to the best light God shall give him," end quote. He also must promise, quote, "to promote true piety and godliness by his example and instruction," end quote. Another quote, "The rector or president shall also cause the scriptures daily, except on the Sabbath mornings and evenings, to be read by the students at the times of prayer in the school. And upon the Sabbath, he shall either expound practical theology or cause the non-graduating students to repeat sermons, so that through the blessing of God, it may be conducive to their establishment in the principles of the Christian Protestant religion." Another quote, "The exercises of the students had the aspect of a theological rather than a literary institution. They were practiced twice a day in reading the scriptures, giving an account of their proficiency in practical and spiritual truths, accompanied by theoretical observations on the language and logic of the sacred writings. They were carefully to attend God's ordinances and be examined on their profiting, commonplacing the sermons and repeating them publicly in the hall. In every year and every week of the college course, every class was practiced in the Bible and catechetical divinity, end quote. Reverend Thomas Shepard, a learned divine and laborious minister of God, conceived the design of procuring voluntary contributions of corn money being out of the question from all parts of New England for the purpose of maintaining poor students. He laid the following memorial before the commissioners of the United Colonies of Massachusetts, Plymouth, Connecticut, and New Haven, which met at Hartford in 1644. To the honored commissioners, quote, "Those whom God has called to attend the welfare of religious commonwealths have been prompt to extend their care for the good of public schools, by means of which the commonwealth may be furnished unto knowing and understanding men in all callings, and the church with an able minister in all places, without which it's easy to see how both these estates may decline and degenerate into gross ignorance, and consequently into great and universal profaneness. May it please you, therefore, among other things of common concernment and public benefit, to take into your consideration some way of comfortable maintenance for that school of the prophets that is now established. If therefore it were recommended by you to the freedom of every family that's able and willing to give throughout the plantations, to give but the fourth part of a bushel of corn or something equivalent thereto, end quote. The Constitution of Massachusetts of 1780 thus refers to Harvard College, quote, "Whereas our wise and pious ancestors, so early as the year 1636, laid the foundation of Harvard College, in which university many persons of great eminence have, by the blessing of God, been initiated into those arts and sciences which qualified them for public employment, both in church and state. And whereas the encouragement of the arts and sciences and all good literature tends to the honor of God, the advantage of the Christian religion, and the great benefit of this and the other United States of America, it is declared that the president and fellows of Harvard College," end quote. In 1696, there were 116 pastors in the 129 churches, and 109 of these were from Harvard. Harvard has educated 1,673 ministers. 351 are still living. Yale College dates from 1700, and in its earlier years, the Assembly's Catechism in Greek was read by the freshmen. The sophomores studied Hebrew. The juniors, sophomores, and the seniors, both at Harvard and Yale, were thoroughly instructed in the divinity in the admirable compendium of Wolobesius. Yale has given to our churches 1,661 ministers, of whom 741 are still living in the state of Connecticut, down to 1842. Out of 947 ministers, only 33 were not graduates. Princeton was started in 1741, one of the fruits of the Great Revival, and by the new side of that day. Dartmouth was a missionary school from its inception in 1769, and its catalog gives the names of more than 700 ministers, a quarter part of all its graduates. Almost all of our later colleges are the fruit of Christian beneficence. and their foundations have been laid with the prayers of our churches. And he who heareth prayer has breathed upon them his divine blessing, and through their influence sanctified our youth for the service of Christ and his church. They have aspired to realize that ideal of education which Milton had envisioned when he said, quote, "The end of learning is to repair the ruins of our first parents by regaining to know God aright, and out of that knowledge to love him, to imitate him, to be like him, as we may the nearest by possessing our souls of true virtue, which, being united to the heavenly grace of faith, makes up the highest perfection."